Pesach is Passover. Passover is just the English word for the holiday of Pesach, which is what I call it, and that's what I'm going to be calling it going forward. Pesach. It is a commemoration of the Jewish nation being freed by God, by Hashem. Hashem is God. I'm going to be using that word. From slavery in Egypt. Then we ended up traveling the desert for 40 years. We got the Torah during that time, and we went to Eretz Yisrael, our land. It's a very important holiday for the Jewish people. Extremely important. And contrary to popular belief, and I guess I understand how this happened, but to me, who grew up as irreligious as an Orthodox Jew, it just boggles my mind that people think that Pesach is just the Seder. It isn't. It's not just the Seder, or I should say it's not just the Sederim. That's plural of Seder in Hebrew, because in Israel there's one Seder, but everywhere else in the world that a Jew is, there are two Sederim. The first 2 nights have a Seder. In Israel, it's a 7-day holiday, one holiday day in the beginning, some intermediate days, another holiday day at the end. Everywhere else, it's 8 days, so 2 holiday days, intermediate days, and then another 2 holiday days. But the whole thing is Pesach. And during Pesach, we don't eat any chametz. Chametz is leaven. That's the exact translation, but leaves much to be desired. Basically, we don't eat any grain products on Pesach unless it's matzah, because we don't eat any fermented grain products. Not all fermented things, because we do have wine. Sauerkraut is fermented. Pickles are fermented. All those are okay. But grain products that have been fermented, which translates to everything that's a grain product except matzah, we don't eat on Pesach. But we don't just not eat chametz, we remove it completely from our houses because we can't own it or derive any benefit from it during that time. And we don't want to, by mistake, eat some that was left in the house, which translates to a very serious cleaning job, which is where spring cleaning originates. The more you know. So there's a lot of cleaning happening now. What extent you clean, where you clean, will depend a lot on family custom and how food is handled in your house. I grew up, and this is how I raised my kids, we eat our meals in the kitchen or the dining room. We're not eating all over the house, so I don't have to worry about crumbs being stuck in the corners of my couch and in every toy and game and book, because it's gross. Forget about Pesach. I don't do this because of Pesach. I just think it's gross to have crumbs of food everywhere, so that's not how we do things, but everyone does things differently. So you need to clean more, though, if there's food everywhere in your house. So exactly how much cleaning happens in other places in the house will depend on a lot of things, like I just said, but the kitchen, dining room, place you eat most of your meals will need a serious cleaning and something called turning over it. So we call it where we change it for Pesach. It's not actually turning things upside down. It's a very confusing terminology. And that'll happen closer to Pesach because we need to eat for the next number of weeks. And that isn't just cleaning. When it comes to the kitchen, people have separate pots, separate dishes for Pesach because their regular ones are contaminated with chametz. The way to understand this is if people are very, very gluten sensitive, they can't even use the same toaster oven. They can't often use the same pans and dishes as gluten because even if they're washed, there could be contaminated slightly. I know people who are this sensitive. I know people who are this sensitive to things like peanut butter, that they need to make sure that the knife is separate and never used for peanut butter because they're so allergic to peanuts. Not knowing this whole science of contamination, thousands of years ago, practicing Jews established that you either need separate things for Pesach or you need to clean them meticulously. And then in the case of metal things, you can immerse them in boiling water. There are specific nitty-gritties of Jewish law that I'm not going into. So what most people do is they clean their kitchens completely. Sinks will be like scrubbed completely, and then their boiling water poured into them. Ovens there and stoves, there are specific ways they have to be cleaned. I'm not going to go into those. Refrigerators, less complicated because everything is cold in there, so it's less susceptible to contamination being like inside, but those are also clean. Some people cover shelves, some people just clean meticulously. Different ways of doing things. After it's completely cleaned, you'll often empty some cabinets or have like shelves you'll roll in with all your not new, because you save them from year to year in boxes in the attic or basement or storage closet or whatever, Pesach dishes and pots, etc. And you can't start cooking for Pesach, which is, like I said, a week-long celebration until you do this. So often people will do this a number of days or a week in advance so they can start cooking. So that means they're eating their Pesach food for extra time. Some people rather do it last minute and cook very quickly, do marathon cooking. I'm not very good at that. Or cook very simply. There's no one specific way of doing it, but you need to do the turning over and changing over of your kitchen. Now, that doesn't mean every single cabinet is empty. Some people just empty some cabinets. Some people will roll in shelves, different ways of doing things. But when you're cooking for Pesach, it'll be on your separate Pesach utensils, dishes, cooking equipment, etc. What some people have in order to make advanced cooking, I'm very into advanced cooking, easier, is something called a Pesach kitchen. And that is a separate kitchen that they cook their Pesach food in. And then they just close that up during the year and don't use that kitchen during the year. I have seen Pesach kitchens that are big rooms with windows that are huge, lots of counter space, lots of cabinet space. I've seen Pesach kitchens that are in closets. I have seen Pesach kitchens that people just set up temporarily in their laundry rooms so they can start doing some advanced cooking, and then they'll turn over the regular kitchens and continue. There are different ways of doing it. Some people, like I said, don't have a separate Pesach kitchen. I sort of have a Pesach kitchen and sort of have a Pesach closet. Really, I turn my entire den into my Pesach kitchen because everything's sort of stuffed into the closet. There is a laundry sink in there, and my Pesach stove, my Pesach range is in there, and everything else is sort of stuffed in. I don't have like kitchen cabinets or counters. I wanted kitchen cabinets and counters, but that was like the last thing, and then we had finished doing the house, and there was no money left for our actual separate kitchen. So I made do, and I use folding tables as my counters. You know something? It works. And yes, that means for about a month from Purim to Pesach, there's a month between Purim and Pesach, and I set it up officially right after Purim. We don't have our den, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with giving up our den so I can be able to calmly cook for Pesach in the way that works for me. This is what works for me. There are some people I've spoken to who do Pesach every year and are horrified by the fact that I give up an entire room for a month. They're like, Pesach is just a week. I can just cook in 2 days. It's fine. For me, Pesach is not just a week. It's a whole reset of everything because I use a lot of building blocks in my cooking, like chicken stock, and I make lemon juice, and I make all new dressings, and I stock all those in my freezer, and they end up making much more than a week's worth and ends up lasting me for a time afterwards. Like anytime I make things in advance and they last me for a while, but everything has to be made new for Pesach because it has to be made with kosher for Pesach ingredients and on my Pesach equipment. And that's how I do things. Like I said, different people do things differently. Pesach is going to be taking over my life starting in about 2 weeks, and I love it. Remember, this part of the reason that I spend a lot of time doing things is I also create recipes and share recipes with all of you. And by the way, anybody can make any of the recipes I make for Pesach. They're just basically gluten-free except for like maybe a couple that have matzah meal in them, which is ground up matzah that you can use if that's your family custom. Not everyone does use that. Speaking of family customs, one other thing, there are very particular family customs when it comes to what can be used for Pesach. Some people peel all their vegetables, are extra careful. Maybe the outside of one of their vegetables or fruit touched chametz. Some people eat legumes, if your family tradition is that. We do not. Some people eat quinoa. We do. Some people don't. Some people will make every single thing from scratch. Some people will buy products that are certified kosher for Pesach. A lot of different. So when I refer to people's different Pesach minhagim are customs. When I make a recipe, I'll say if your family custom, if your family minhag is not to use these ingredients, you can try these. There are some people whose custom's so strict that they won't even use sugar on Pesach. I don't know if I'll be able to tailor my recipes to that. It's very hard. I mean, you can make chicken stock. I think everyone can make chicken stock, though that's not true. There are some families, and I know this because I know some of these families whose custom is not to eat chicken on Pesach, but they do eat meat. It is a holiday where your minhagim, your family customs, really play a big part. And I love making recipes for Pesach and cooking for Pesach because I love the challenge of the limits, even more limitations than usual, and coming up with delicious food within a narrower set of guidelines. I'll be sharing lots of recipes. I'll be showing the different things I make. I make almond milk from scratch. I make nut butter from scratch. I have a lot of fun, and you can make any